Well, the country, as you've heard, has witnessed several violent crime incidents, and just recently there's been a sharp focus on contract killings and hitmen. Just yesterday, as we've told you just now, in broad daylight yesterday in Braamfontein, 3 people were shot and killed, and an innocent bystander, a student, got hit by a stray bullet. A few days ago in Dobsonville, Soweto, a doctor was shot and killed in his own consultation rooms during what appears to have been a robbery by someone pretending to be a patient. In Jeffreys Bay, councillor Jaques Alexander was shot several times in the town's main road. Now, these incidents are just a few that highlight the ongoing problems of violence in everyday life in South Africa. To help us understand why this happens, we are now joined by Professor Saths Cooper, an experienced psychologist who played a significant role in the fight against apartheid. Together, we'll explore what is behind these violent acts, or at least try. Professor, thank you so much for your time and good morning to you. Of course, these incidents, continue to raise the question, why are we such a violent nation? Perhaps share your insights, on the psychological factors contributing to such violent incidents, Prof.
Well, look, violence is not new to this country. It's been a feature of life here for decades, for at least 100 years now. Violence has been a measure to use against the majority of the population. In the apartheid era, in the 80s in particular, the levels of violence reached disproportionate levels. And since then, there was a lull during the, as we became a democratic country, there was a short lull, and then the incidents began to rise again. So 30 years into democracy, we remain a deeply divided and unequal and violent country. Most of us confront economic uncertainty and social insecurity. There are chronic levels of violence. There's ongoing traumatic stress that the majority of us experience because we're all on guard. If there's a sudden noise that reminds us of a violent incident, we all jump up and we take note. Very few of us remain balanced when that happens. So we live in what I call psychic emergency conditions. And if you take that into account together with the levels of disaffection, marginalization, people living on the fringes, at least 40% living in shack settlements, and the highest unemployment rate in the world, the lowest employment rate in the world, we've got a recipe for mayhem that will continue.
Professor, I think, you're giving this historical perspective and more so, which is important, to better understand what is behind the psyche of the perpetrators. I mean, what does this then do, to the mental well-being of particularly the victims or those that find themselves in positions where they cannot, defend themselves? I mean, you paint this picture of a legacy of apartheid and, of course, what we are seeing now in terms of the social ills having an influence on the patterns of violence that we are seeing today. But just maybe perhaps delve into what that does to the psyche of those that are, behind this level of violence that we are seeing, the victims.
Well, all of us live on that level of watchfulness. We are very wary in the public spaces we in, and sometimes even in our homes, we're very wary. So there's a high state of vigilance, and that arises because of the levels of insecurity that all of us experience. We are not safe in most spaces we occupy. Within the home, we're not safe because you can be subject to a violent intrusion. You can be subject to that in recreational spaces. So the impact is one where we are all affected. We live with high stress levels. If you look at the kinds of issues that many people present with, high blood pressure and so on, that is an indication of the socio-economic political conditions under which we live. Half of those problems that we present with, at least, are not physical. They arise out of environmental factors, out of psychological, psychosocial factors that we experience. And it's also interesting, Unati, that the current Commissioner for the province, General Elias Mawela, in addressing Parliament in September 2014, he talked about some of this. And he was then the head of public order policing. He talked of an upsurge against state authority, but economically, people are worse off. They have almost nothing. A majority of people in this country live on the fringes, don't know where their next meal is coming from, and in our schools, where our children learn to express violence. You know enough about the shocking incidents that hit social media, where principals get attacked. There are thousands of children suspended each year for physical misconduct, right? And at least 40% of children have been victims of crime in school.
Absolutely,
so all
Prof.
of that,
so
we're
Prof,
getting socialized.
Absolutely. So before we talk about, what can be done to arrest, some of these, problems that we're sitting with. I mean, let's talk just about the brazenness of some of these crimes and how these criminals have become. We look at the high-profile crimes, in cases at the moment, like the Senzo Mayua murder case, and quite recently the AKA and Tibbs cases. But also, I mean, just the incident that we saw yesterday, which we read in our introduction, how this gunman then targeted two people sitting in a car in broad daylight, no masks, was not trying to hide his identity at all, and how then his act led to the death of an 18-year-old student and another one fighting for his life in hospital. I mean, what is the reasons behind the brazenness of some of these criminals? What does it say about law enforcement in our country at the moment?
Well, those two are linked. The brazenness and the law enforcement, because another one of your headlines is the closure of the police station in our nation's capital. Right? Now, if our police are inept, if our police can't do the basic minimum that they're supposed to do, when last did you see police on the streets, walking the beat? They're terrified because of the levels of crime that have just been allowed to grow. So effectively, there's been a brazenness in the last 15 years, steadily rising. Because I can commit that crime knowing that I can bribe somebody, or I can have somebody in authority to intercede, or nobody will care unless it is somebody important that is attacked, unless it is a well-known and especially a political or important social figure that these things happen to. And if it's ordinary people, 95% of our population, very little happens. Those statistics that are given every few months are gory statistics. They're rising. They tell us that so many die every year. We actually have the highest murder rates in the world. We shouldn't be having that. We have the lowest rates, one of the lowest rates of peace in society. Now, all of these have not been attended to seriously. You cannot go and do things at the symptomatic level without dealing with the root causes. The root causes, I'm afraid, are an outrageously poor and inadequate educational system where we're not teaching young people to be part of society and to have other ways to deal with the difference and conflict.
Yeah.
We have a hopeless economic situation where vast majority are unemployed. You know, the statistics we get every month or so only show those who in the last 30 days to a quarter are registering, but the majority are unemployed. It's unsustainable. We continue this way, we will see shades or worse of July 2021.
Yeah, and Prof, I think you importantly, you know, delved into the, you know, the root causes. So what is then left? You know, when you look at, for instance, the South African Police Service and the NPA, the justice, you know, side of this whole value chain, what then can we do in terms of interventions from these spheres of law enforcement, and then you merge that with government and civil society? Because it does also seem here that there is a lack of coordination amongst, you know, these stakeholders that are needed, you know, to reduce the prevalence of violent crimes in this country.
It's not only the lack of coordination. I mean, we've had more ministries and silos during democracy. They've risen to a crescendo. It's not only that. It's a combination of what you've raised that creates a toxic mix of hopelessness, because we don't have all those institutions and the current states of authority have crumbled. We, in that respect of being enabling citizenship and participation, have failed at the level of ensuring law and order. We have dangerously and hopelessly failed at the levels of preventing crime, at the level of early detection, at the level of educating ourselves that this is right and that is wrong. It doesn't exist. So we actually going into a crazy period now. I know psychologists are not supposed to say crazy, but we're going into a crazy season with everybody, 1,700 parties contesting an election, and not one is able to give us in a paragraph what they're going to do to stop this decline, restore South Africa's credibility as a place where we are at peace with ourselves, let alone with the external world. Because we also turn in on ourselves. There are kinds of crimes in our country that are almost unique, and that you know, where do we see in any other country in the world, and even smaller countries, that we rape 2-year-olds, we rape infants? So something has happened in the psyche of our nation, and I use that word nation very sparingly, because we're not a nation. We're a warring group of ethnicities and factions looking out for ourselves only. Absolutely. That has not happened. Social cohesion that's braided about in our constitution just simply doesn't exist. And you know, often, Nonati, we talk of our community. Just let's be serious. Those communities don't exist. They've been battered down.
Prof, thank you so much for unpacking all of that for us. I mean, it was never going to be an easy conversation, and most certainly needs more time and, of course, more collaboration, as you also say, and interventions. But thank you so much for your insights. We really do appreciate it. This morning, Professor Saths Cooper there, an experienced psychologist who played a significant role in the fight against apartheid, to just unpacking the very complex issues of, you know, crime, and how this nation is seeing the violent levels of crimes in recent months.